Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at the concept of becoming from a Buddhist perspective. And for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at the book, The Paradox of Becoming. And as the title kind of suggests, the idea of becoming in Buddhism is kind of paradoxical in and of itself. So I'm really interested to jump into this and see what kind of insights we can glean from it.
Yeah, it's not just about like the process of becoming, but it's that our desire to even stop becoming actually feeds into that cycle more.
Yeah, that's kind of what the title of the book is hinting at. But before we jump too far into that, maybe we can just start with how becoming is even explained in Buddhism.
Sure, yeah. So the book starts with this analogy of like a field, a seed, and moisture to explain how becoming happens.
Okay.
So you can break that down a little bit.
Let's do that.
So the field represents karma, which I think is often very misunderstood. Karma is not fate or predestination. But think of it more as like the potential that's created by our past actions, both intentional and unintentional, and the consequences that ripple out from them.
So it's not like our future is set in stone by our past karma.
Not at all. No, think of it like this. You have a set of ingredients: flour, sugar, eggs. You could make a cake, you could make cookies, or you could make something else entirely. So your past actions or karma provide the ingredients, the possibilities, but what you bake with them in the present moment, that's your choice.
Okay, so past actions are kind of like they give us the ingredients, but we get to choose what to do with them. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the field, which is karma. What is the seed in this analogy?
So the seed represents consciousness, and much like karma, consciousness is also not this like fixed entity. It's constantly arising and passing away moment by moment, depending on conditions.
Okay, so it's not like this separate soul or essence that stays the same throughout our lives.
Right. Think of it more as a process. Like, for example, your sensory consciousness, like seeing, hearing, smelling. That arises dependent on your senses and like the objects that you perceive. So it's all intertwined in this kind of like dynamic dance of change.
So I guess that constant change, that's kind of what makes becoming stressful. Like we never really arrive anywhere.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, this kind of inherent instability of consciousness is a big part of the Buddhist understanding of suffering. And what's even more intriguing is that consciousness actually appears twice in the cycle of dependent origination. It arises both before and after our senses and intentions come into play.
Wait, so it comes before and after?
Yes.
I feel like we might need to unpack that a bit more. But
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the field, which is karma. We've got the seed, which is consciousness. What about the moisture? What's that all about?
Yeah, so the moisture is craving. And this is where things get really interesting. Because while craving is technically a type of karma, it has a unique role. It acts like a spotlight, choosing where to focus our attention and allowing becoming to solidify around that point.
Okay, so craving isn't just about wanting things in the future.
Yeah.
It's also about how we experience the present.
Exactly. It's wanting things to be a certain way, both now and in the future. And the book has this great analogy. They say that craving is like a seamstress, stitching the elements of becoming together around a specific point, like a button on a piece of cloth.
Oh, that's a good analogy. Can you give us a real-world example of how this actually works in our lives?
Sure. So imagine you're attached to a certain image of yourself, maybe as successful or popular.
Yeah.
So that craving to maintain that image shapes your actions, your choices, even how you perceive the world. You might find yourself constantly seeking validation or comparing yourself to others.
Oh, yeah, and if that image is threatened, that's where the clinging comes in, right?
Exactly.
Like trying desperately to hold on to it.
Yeah, and that clinging fueled by craving just creates more suffering.
But craving is so unpredictable, right?
Yeah.
One minute we want this, the next minute we want that.
Absolutely. Craving is fickle and constantly shifting, which makes the whole process of becoming even more unstable and stressful. The book compares craving to a monkey swinging from branch to branch, never finding a place to rest.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Okay, so we've got this cycle of becoming, driven by karma, shaped by consciousness, fueled by craving. If it's inherently stressful, how do we escape it?
Well, that's the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
The very desire to stop becoming to escape this cycle can itself become a form of craving, fueling the cycle further. It's like trying to extinguish a fire with more fire.
So even wanting to be free keeps us trapped.
In a way, yeah.
Okay, well, this is, I think we're just starting to scratch the surface here of how paradoxical this concept is.
Yeah.
But maybe we can take a little break and we'll come back and delve a little bit deeper into this paradox.
Sounds good. Welcome back. So last time we were talking about this idea that wanting to escape the cycle of becoming can actually trap us further.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. It's like the more we struggle against it, the more stuck we get.
Exactly. And this desire for non-becoming can manifest in a lot of different ways. Like we might try to annihilate parts of ourselves that we don't like. Or we might cling desperately to some state of perfect peace and stillness.
Right. So even in striving for liberation, we're still clinging to a specific outcome.
Yeah.
Which is still a form of craving. It's so sneaky.
It is. It's very subtle.
So if even the desire for freedom keeps us bound, is there any way out of this paradox?
That's the million-dollar question. And this is where I think the field analogy that we were talking about before becomes really helpful.
Okay.
Remember, the field of karma represents potential, the possibilities that are shaped by our past actions. But that seed of consciousness, it won't sprout without the moisture of craving.
So if we can somehow withdraw that moisture, we can stop the cycle of becoming, even if the field of karma is still there.
Exactly.
But how do we do that? How do we stop craving when even the desire to stop craving is a craving?
Right. Well, it's a delicate dance. It's a very subtle shift in perspective. And instead of forcefully trying to stop all craving, which is kind of like trying to dam a river, the Buddha offers a more skillful approach. He suggests that we cultivate a specific type of becoming that naturally weakens our attachment to all forms of craving.
So we're using becoming to end becoming.
Precisely. It's not about eradicating ourselves or achieving some static state of non-existence. It's about using the process of becoming itself as a tool for liberation.
Okay.
The book uses this metaphor of a raft. Like, we need the raft to cross the river, but once we reach the other shore, we don't need to carry it anymore.
I like that. So what kind of becoming are we talking about here? What are the qualities that we should be cultivating?
Well, the book goes into more detail in later chapters, but essentially it's about cultivating qualities like mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion. These are the qualities that, when developed naturally, help us to see through the illusion of a separate self, and they help us recognize the interconnected and impermanent nature of reality.
So that makes sense. If we can see through the illusion of a fixed self, then the grip of craving might loosen. But how do these qualities actually help us break free from this cycle?
Well, let's break it down a little bit. Mindfulness is about cultivating a clear, present moment awareness of what's happening within and around us. Our thoughts, our feelings, our sensations, the ever-changing flow of experience.
Mindfulness is something I hear a lot about, but I always struggle with what it actually means in practice.
Yeah, it's really about paying attention, but in a very specific way, on purpose, in the present moment, and without judgment. So instead of being swept away by our thoughts and emotions, we learn to observe them with a sense of spaciousness and curiosity.
So it's like creating some distance between ourselves and our inner world.
Yeah, exactly. And that allows us to see more clearly the patterns of craving, clinging, and becoming that are causing us so much suffering. And that clear seeing is really the foundation for wisdom.
So wisdom in this context isn't just about knowing a lot of facts.
Right. It's about seeing the true nature of reality. Buddhist wisdom, or vipassana, is about directly experiencing the impermanence, the interconnectedness, and the lack of inherent self in all things, including ourselves. And it's this deep understanding that really helps us to loosen the grip of craving.
Okay, so mindfulness helps us see clearly, and wisdom helps us understand the deeper meaning of what we're seeing. I can see how they work together. But what about compassion? Where does that fit in?
Compassion arises naturally from wisdom. As we see the interconnectedness of all things, we begin to recognize our shared humanity, our shared vulnerability to suffering. And this understanding weakens the grip of self-centered craving and clinging.
It's like when we see ourselves in others, their suffering becomes our suffering, and we naturally become less likely to want to inflict harm on ourselves or others.
Precisely. Compassion helps to dissolve the boundaries that we create between ourselves and the world. It fosters this sense of interconnectedness that really undermines the very foundation of becoming, which is based on a sense of separation.
So in a way, by breaking down the illusion of a separate self, we actually become more connected to others.
Exactly. That's the beautiful paradox. As we let go of clinging to a separate self, we naturally extend our care and concern outward.
So we've identified these qualities that we need to cultivate: mindfulness, wisdom, compassion, in order to navigate this paradoxical path. But how do we actually put these qualities into practice? Are there specific techniques we can use?
Absolutely, and that's what we're going to talk about next time. We're going to explore how we can actually embody these qualities and start cultivating the kind of becoming that ultimately leads to liberation.
Perfect. I cannot wait to delve into that. This is fascinating stuff. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll be back soon to continue this exploration. All right, so we're back. And we've been talking about this idea of using becoming to break free from becoming. and how we can cultivate those qualities that can help us see through this illusion of a separate self.
Yes, exactly. And it's not about becoming someone better or reaching some final destination. It's more about understanding the process of becoming itself and then using that understanding to cultivate greater freedom and well-being.
Right. And I think the last time we left off talking about those qualities that we can cultivate: mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion. But how do we actually put those into practice in our daily lives?
Well, that's where the practice of meditation comes in. It's not just about relaxation or zoning out, although those can be pleasant side effects. But meditation is really about actively training the mind.
Like an athlete training their body.
Exactly. Through consistent practice, we can develop the mental muscles we need to break free from those conditioned patterns of becoming.
So it's not about stopping our thoughts altogether,
No, not at all.
but learning to relate to them differently.
Right. So, for example, mindfulness meditation helps us to become more aware of our thoughts, our feelings, and our sensations without judgment. We learn to observe them as they arise and pass away, like clouds moving across the sky.
That sounds challenging. My mind is constantly chattering.
It takes practice, for
Yeah.
sure. But even a few minutes of daily meditation can make a difference. The key is consistency and patience. And over time, you'll start to create more space between yourself and your thoughts. And that allows you to respond to situations more skillfully rather than just reacting habitually.
So mindfulness helps us to cultivate that present moment awareness, which, as we discussed, is essential for wisdom. But how do we actually cultivate wisdom itself?
Well, wisdom, or vipassana in the Buddhist tradition, is about seeing the true nature of reality. And the best way to cultivate wisdom is through direct experience. So as we practice mindfulness, we begin to see more clearly the impermanent, interconnected nature of everything, including our own thoughts and feelings.
We're kind of peeling back the layers of illusion to see what's really there.
Exactly. And as we see this truth more clearly, wisdom arises naturally. We realize that this self that we cling to is not a fixed entity, but a fluid process of becoming. And with that realization, the grip of craving starts to loosen.
And the compassion naturally flows from that wisdom. Right?
Precisely. Because as we see the interconnectedness of all things, we recognize our shared humanity, our shared vulnerability to suffering. And that recognition opens our hearts to compassion. We naturally feel a sense of care and concern for ourselves and others.
It's like when we see ourselves in others, their suffering becomes our suffering.
Yeah.
And we naturally become less likely to want to inflict harm on ourselves or others.
Exactly. Compassion helps to dissolve the boundaries that we create between ourselves and the world. It fosters a sense of interconnectedness that really undermines the very foundation of becoming, which is based on a sense of separation.
So in a way, by breaking down the illusion of a separate self, we actually become more connected to others.
Yeah, that's the beautiful paradox. As we let go of clinging to this separate self, we naturally extend our care and concern outward.
That's amazing. This has been such an insightful exploration of the paradox of becoming. It's given me a whole new perspective on how to approach personal growth and just the challenges of life in general.
Yeah, and it's important to remember this is a journey, not a destination. Be patient with yourself, be curious, and keep an open mind.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the paradox of becoming. We hope you found it as insightful as we did. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep becoming.